Alright guys, I'm doubling up again on this rapid response video with two comments because they are along the same lines. So our first comment here is from Operator Steff, who says, "Are you a fan of when DC does reboots for their franchise like New 52 and Rebirth? Or would you rather just have one consistent timeline with one main creator who oversees everything, kind of like Invincible, or My Hero Academia, I assume MHA is? I've never actually read it. I personally think DC would be really cool if it was like a One Piece where there is just one guy who oversees everything, and there is one main canonical timeline." And then the second comment comes from Kak, "Resetting the continuity every few years sucks." So Kak's comment is basically how I feel. I think the resetting of the timelines and all of this multiversal stuff that DC does nowadays is boring, overplayed, and yes, sucks. If you are a person who likes that type of stuff, do not get me wrong, I completely understand, because I can see the interest in it. I can see the likability. It's just not my thing anymore, and if it's going to be done, it has to be done far more scarcely than it is today. There is a little bit of give and take when you look at this situation, because you could sit here and say DC could start from 1938 all the way until 2024, and there's just one timeline. All of these things have happened in comic books over the past almost 100 years. There are certain levels to rebooting the continuity of these comic books in which I 100% understand. They hit particular times where they have to make things a little more modern, and they need to get newer age fans into the comic books by giving them stories they might connect with. When they rebooted timelines from the Gold Age to the Silver Age to the Bronze Age, more or less, they kept things very similar and just went with the flow. However, these characters and this world changed, it changed. It wasn't until the Bronze Age into what I call the modern age, from 1980s to 2011, when they decided to reboot, they did a massive Infinite Crisis event. Don't get me wrong, I think there are elements of that comic book that are really interesting and it's kind of fun to read. But oh my god, is it anywhere near from condensed? It is simply one of those comic books that just feels like go with the flow, see how it ends, and move forward into the future. Because pretty much whatever happens in Infinite Crisis won't really matter moving forward. When the modern age came to an end and they started getting into the New 52 in 2011, that was a somewhat sad moment for me. That was the creation of a new universe in which I invested so many years in the modern age. Now those stories were done and we were moving forward into something else. And it's crazy to think about the New 52 because it didn't really last that long when you match it up to where we are now in Rebirth. And I think that is because the New 52 got a lot of love and hate from so many different areas of that continuity. There were people who loved the entire thing, who hated the entire thing, and who only liked the way certain characters were handled. I would argue that Batman and maybe even Wonder Woman were handled pretty well. The Deathstroke line was really well done in that series. But overall, I think you could argue that there is a lot to forget about in the New 52, and slowly, once again, it just became about another multiversal event. It became about Darkseid and Anti-Monitor and Perpetua destroying the multiverse. And now, here we are in Rebirth, in which it's a continuity, I'm not even gonna lie, I don't know much about. I've gotten so tired of the continuity shifting and the multiversal breakdowns that I've no longer been interested in keeping up to date with where they currently are. Because you never really know. 1, 2, 3 years from now, they could reboot it into another continuity. And I think some of the benefits of having one main continuity is the ability to say, hey, here is where we started and here is where we are right now. Even in the modern age, there were times during the 90s or even somewhere in the 2000s, they would roughly change the continuity in certain comic books so that certain things did not happen. And they would do it within a window of months. Oh, you read this Catwoman comic book in May of 1999? Well, in January of 2000, that storyline is somewhat the same, but the characteristics are going to be a little bit different because we're retconning certain things. Main continuities are such a valuable yet tricky thing because if you find ways to keep it going, that's amazing. But it seems like in comic books, people do use a lot of excuses to be able to just change things whenever they want, so that if something happened a couple years ago, well, guess what? I'm gonna write a story where it never happens again. And almost in ways you kind of read it for no reason at all, and I've always found that to be a little strange. That's why over time I find much more enjoyability reading DC Elseworlds comic books than I do the main continuity. I think in main continuities things don't always line up, and there is way too many things to read all to follow one pathway of a story, whereas within Elseworlds you know what you're getting. You know you're getting a creative storyline from one or maybe at most two people, and you know it's going to be different from the usual things we always see from the quote-unquote canon continuities. I think you could also argue that IPs like this, a brand like DC, it's always evolving, so keeping only one storyline, one canon continuity might not be possible. And I'm not necessarily saying they can't do things to maybe reroute, go back in time a little, change things, modernize things, but the way I see it, it does not always have to be, okay, here comes an infinite crisis level event, the Anti-Monitor is eating planets, Perpetua is creating a new multiverse, and these versions of these characters that you have begun to love are now going to get destroyed, and if not destroyed, recrafted into newer or other versions of these same characters. I also feel as if rebooting continuities, it does cause a lot of arguments in the fan base. I can't tell you guys how many times I've gotten comments on other videos because a lot of my knowledge comes from these characters from the modern age that I'm an old fan. And the fact that I'm not up to date with Rebirth basically makes my points invalid, which I think is one of the stupidest things I've ever heard from people in this community. I don't care if your love for DC comes from the main continuity or if it comes from Elseworlds only. If you like these characters for why you like them, then your points are valid. You have your reasons to like what you like and to bring certain things to the table. For example, I think one of the best Superman stories of all time is Earth 1. That's not main continuity, that's Elseworlds, and I don't think anyone's ever captured Superman that well before. Once again, Kingdom Come, I think one of the best interpretations of Superman. That's Elseworlds. That's not main continuity, and I still prefer it. So whereas I would actually like to see what DC could do if they decided, hey, no more reboots, we're keeping one main continuity, I don't think that's ever going to really happen. Unfortunately, I think we've just gotten to this situation where you have to make two choices. You have to stick with Elseworld stories, which gives you something brand new every day and doesn't rehash the same things over and over, or you have to stick with these reboots of continuities that seem to be happening every 10 years or so. And if that means getting potentially newer aged fans into the comic books, it's what they're gonna do. But there you go, guys. That is my opinion on the DC continuity. Personally, it's gotten really tiring. It's not my type of thing, and I've gotten really bored of reading those types of stories. But regardless, thanks to Operator Steff and CAC for the 2 comments, and you guys let me know in the comments below how you feel about DC's main continuities. But that is all I have for you on this one, everyone, and until next time, I will talk to you all very soon.